Hello, everyone. Welcome to the talk today, where I will have the pleasure of introducing you to aquatic fungi. Thank you all for coming and for joining online, those who are watching via the live stream. My name is Jenny Anderson. I'm a researcher at the Swedish University for Agricultural Sciences, and my specialty is working with aquatic fungi. So it's a time for some interaction already. I would love it if you could take out your phones and scan that QR code. And that will take you to an opportunity to answer this question. And as you can see, honesty is appreciated and welcome. So it should take you there if you scan the code. Yep, great. We'll just wait another second so that everyone has an opportunity to log their vote. I feel like perhaps there's some colleagues of mine who might have heard me talk about aquatic fungi in the room, because this is not the normal kind of distribution one expects when one asks this question in a presentation. So it is fantastic that we have some people in the audience that have knowledge of the aquatic fungi. I hope that you can sit back and enjoy the information today. And those who are new to aquatic fungi, I'm really excited to introduce these organisms to you. So before hearing about this talk and our talk today, you might not have known that aquatic fungi exist. So today we're going to just take 3 easy steps. We're going to talk about what aquatic fungi are, what are they, what do they do, and why and how should we protect these fungi. So it'll be 3 bite-sized chunks, and we'll take a break in between for questions. Oh, that slide we don't need. Okay, so what are the aquatic fungi? We need to start to ask what the aquatic fungi are by asking what fungi are. So if you could please, and there's this question, and then there's one Menti question way at the end, so you can then set your phone down safely. So are fungi plants? Are they animals? Or are they neither plants nor animals? We have an incredibly well-educated group in the audience today. Congratulations, give yourself a hand. So you are all correct, so thank you for answering. And whoever voted last was very clever. Okay, so you are correct. Fungi are neither plants nor animals. Fungi are their own group, so we call them often their own kingdom. And before we can, as I said, before we can talk more about the aquatic fungi, we'll talk more about what fungi are. So all of you probably recognize something on this screen as a fungus. 1 thing, 2 things, 3 things, 4 things. Okay, so all of these represent fungi. Of course, when I look at the lemon there, I'm looking at the mold on the lemon, which might be something that you've seen in your kitchen, right? All right, so we can all recognize these as fungi. Fungi are eukaryotic organisms that feed by absorption and reproduce by forming spores. So we're not going to go into all of the deep science here. We're just going to take it in kind of easy ways. So they're eukaryotic organisms. That means they keep their DNA inside nuclei in their cells. So in this way, you can think of them as being different from bacteria, for example. They feed by absorption. So fungi release enzymes into their environment that digest the things around them, and then they absorb that nutrition back into their bodies. We do our digestion and absorption in our stomachs, right? Fungi do them to the outside world, but they don't do photosynthesis like a plant would, for example. And they reproduce by forming spores. We've all had that moldy lunchbox. That moldy lunchbox that you open and the poof of stuff comes out, okay? Those are spores, okay? And it's the same kind of idea as with the lemon. So the difference between fungi and aquatic fungi is that aquatic fungi are simply the subset of all of the fungi that rely on an aquatic habitat for some part of their life. Okay? There are more than 150,000 fungal species that have names or are known to science, okay, of which only about 5,000 are aquatic. It's a little bit more than that. But some of this is likely because so few people around the world study aquatic fungi. So, now that we've been looking at pictures of fungi, what do you imagine they look like? Just picture it in your head for just a second. Who's going to admit that their first picture was something like this, a mushroom underwater? Yeah, I see a couple hands. Great. You are correct. That is, in fact, a mushroom that reproduces underwater. This is, however, only the one example of this. So you are right in exactly 1 out of 5,000 cases of what an aquatic fungus looks like. And in fact, only a tiny fraction of all of the fungi produce mushrooms. So that's just a small tip of the diversity. It's just the one that I think we're most comfortable with because we go to the forest, we see them on t-shirts, and so on. So then let's get real about what aquatic fungi look like. The little brown blob I'm showing you in the corner is a relative of the mushroom that I showed you on the picture before. So the little brown blob is one example of an aquatic fungus. But what does most of that fungus look like? Most of any fungus that is multicellular and filamentous looks like this. It has hyphae that grow through or into their substrates and environments, and that's where they release their digestive enzymes and recover them for their nutrition. The brown blob on the slide before and the mushroom on the slide before that, those are reproductive units. That's where the reproduction is happening, where the spores are being formed. So these are some examples of spores of aquatic fungi. And they are wonderful and glorious, and they have really wonderful properties. So in the square boxes are spores. So you can see these spiral shapes, these highly three-dimensional shapes around the blue one is a stain. It's not blue in reality, unfortunately. But these are spores that can trap air, for example, and you can picture them floating in the water for dispersal. There are fungi that have branched shapes so that these float, but they also, if these are fungi that grow in streams, and if you picture the water flowing in a stream, you can see that if it touches the surface in one place, it will be pushed by the current to connect to a substrate in 2 more positions. And that, we think, is an adaptation to living in this flowing stream environment. So it has to be able to stick to a substrate. And there's other adaptations that these fungi have to life in water. Some of them make appendages. This one at the bottom, I don't know if you can see yet. This makes appendages that unfurl as soon as those spores are released into the water. So it makes like a big safety line, you can imagine. It increases the surface area and the chance of it tangling with something when it hits something in the water. So then what are these circles? These circles are the equivalents of those mushrooms in that brown blob from the slide before. So often they look like hairy things. If you look really closely at a stem that you pull out of the water, because they grow on wood, for example. Some grow on leaves, and so then you often see maybe something like this, little dots are the fruiting bodies of some kind of fungi. You can find those on wood as well. This is a kind of bigger example of a black dot. These are not fungi that people stumble across as they're walking happily through the woods. So you have to take a really close look. But once you pop them open and get inside, then they have these beautiful, beautiful kinds of shapes and adaptations to the aquatic life. So now you have seen your first aquatic fungi. I want to focus on how much diversity there is among the aquatic fungi. And this is one example that I like a lot. So the two square pictures we saw on the slide before, those are spores of aquatic fungi. The one on the left for you is a basidiomycete. That means it's a relative of mushrooms that we think about as mushrooms. The one on the right that is closer to me, that is an ascomycete. And so that's related to what is probably growing in your lunchbox and the spore and the fungus that is represented by this particular spore. And those diverged in evolutionary time around 642 million years ago. So for perspective, humans and fruit flies, their evolutionary lineages diverged around 686 million years ago. So you can kind of think of it as the difference between the ascomycetes and basidiomycetes and the diversity that those might represent is really the whole realm between insects and humans. So there's a massive amount of diversity that is even in these two examples, but aquatic fungi come from all of the groups of fungi. And so these are just two of the examples. So let's take a moment and pause and see if you have any questions for me as a starter.
Thank you. So in the pictures where you were showing the fruiting bodies of the aquatics, what sort of size are we talking about on those? How big are they, the dots?
That's a great question. It reversed on my screen, but did not reverse on that screen. Okay, maybe we can't go backwards. I think we're using a different platform for the presentation today, so thank you for your patience. So if we take as an idea of one of those black dots that we saw on wood, something like that can be maybe at a large size, for the ones that I typically study, a few hundred microns. So that's micrometers. So those are fractions of a millimeter. So you can see some of these with the naked eye. Often those kinds of structures, you can see a tiny dot on the wood. The spores, this is, oh boy, it's been a while since I did the calculations. I think this is 8,000 times the size, its actual size. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? You have to, thank you.
I was wondering about the fruiting bodies and if they are all the kind that you pop in order to get the spores out, or if there are any that have spores in a different setting.
So there's all the differences between humans and fruit flies. So there's a tremendous diversity. So the ones that you pop, as you suggest, these ones that were these flask shapes, those are ascomycetes, and the spores that those are producing are sexually produced. So that means two nuclei have come together and fused and produced progeny spores. And that's different than, for example, the one that was the fuzzy, hairy bit. Those are asexually produced spores. And so those are just out into the environment where they detach and flow in go in the stream. And there's lots of variation within there. There are some that are deep within, if it's something like wood, for example. There's the mushroom, for example, that uses air pocket bubbles for dispersal of spores. So there's a huge variation. Does that help?
Yes, it helps. And okay, I have more questions.
Please.
But I will ask only one more. And so, does it mean then if there are aquatic fungi that are both basidiomycetes, ascomycetes, does that mean that their common ancestor was an aquatic fungi? Is the ancestor of all fungi aquatic?
So I can do a whole presentation on this topic. If you think about when fungi evolved, they evolved before there was life on land. So the very earliest evolving fungi evolved in the water. And so I can say yes on that level. I think I happen to know that this particular audience member is also an evolutionary biologist. So then the question becomes a little bit different, and there's lots of convergent evolution, and this means that similar shapes and features have evolved, but independently of each other, in response to having some similarity in their environment, in their conditions. So there's, I think, many cases of this, and we can discuss that. We can come back and have a whole conversation about that. But that satisfying as a start?
Yes.
And I think we have time for just one more question.
Can I or you? Okay. You say there's about 5,000 known aquatic fungal species. Do we have any idea about how many more there are that don't have names yet in the water?
So there's all kinds of, so there's of course many more fungi that exist than we currently know in our scientific studies. And one kind of back of the envelope calculation that I've done that I have to say, and with all of the caveats, so lots of fine print, do not quote me on this, but I think the last back of the envelope calculation that I did, I think I've inserted enough uncertainty there, is probably 150,000-ish. So that's around the total number of all fungi that we know today.
Thank you.
All right, so now let's move on to just a short introduction to what they do. And I will remind you again of this picture, because in a talk this long, or a talk any length, I can't tell you everything that aquatic fungi do. What I can do, because there's so much variation, is break it down into 3 little examples that we can talk about. So one, and the one that I work most closely with, are the aquatic fungi are decomposers. So they can decompose leaves and wood and other things that enter the water. And they're very important in their ecological roles as decomposers. They can also be symbionts. They can be symbionts. This means that they live in very close associations with each other. They can do that as parasites. They can do that as endophytes, and endophytes are fungi that live inside other organisms without causing them noticeable harm. And when we look at the symbiont picture, this is an algal bloom. So some of you may not have been able to swim at your favorite beach because there was too much algae, right? So aquatic fungi can actually break into those shells of those algae and eat them. So they can help in controlling algal blooms. And there's also predators. So this is a fungus that is eating a rotifer. So they can play all different kinds of roles in the aquatic environments. I work mostly with decomposers, so the next example I'm going to give you is of the decomposer pathway that I work with most closely. So this is not what aquatic fungi do. Now we've narrowed it down. Now we're going to talk about what a particular group of aquatic fungi do. And those have a terrible name, in my opinion, in terms of presentations. They're called aquatic hyphomycetes. Okay? And this is an example of a spore from an aquatic hyphomycete. So this kind of fungus is a key decomposer of leaves and streams. So all of those leaves that you see falling in the autumn, this is one of the key ways that they get processed and have their carbon and nutrients entered into the food web. So it can make food, carbon and nutrients available to things like this, caddisfly. Okay, that caddisfly can be eaten by this fish. I'm missing one arrow here, sorry. Okay, so that is carbon and nutrients that were previously trapped in a leaf that are now accessible to the rest of the food web. And why do I say trapped in a leaf? It's because plant cellulose and lignin are really hard to digest compounds, right? In our diet, we call that fiber. Right? And we don't get nutrition from that easily either. So the fungi are able to break down those plant compounds and then allow that carbon and nutrition through the food web. And then I know we have one spider researcher in the room today. So this one is for you. I unfortunately left the spider out of the picture, but you can see where it might come in. So we can have the same decomposing action of the fungus on the leaf. It can be eaten by the caddisfly. The caddisfly can morph into its adult form, which is on the bottom. That adult form can emerge from the stream, and it can fly into a spider web, where they are known to have, we're growing in our understanding of how important actually aquatic fungi are to spiders that live around streams. But in this case, I gave you the example of that being eaten by a bat. So in this way, aquatic fungi can affect both terrestrial and aquatic food webs. Now we're going to narrow one step further for just 1 second. I want to talk about my favorite genus, Tetracladium. All right. So what do Tetracladium do? This is just to give you one more crazy tie about the diversity of these fungi. So they are aquatic hyphomycetes, just like we were talking about on the slide before this, but they can also be endophytes of plants on land. This is two crazy different lifestyles. So an endophyte, again, is a fungus that lives inside a plant without causing disease. So if you've eaten a carrot, you may have eaten this fungus, which is kind of a cool link between the terrestrial and aquatic habitats. We have just a few minutes, I think, for questions now. If we can have...
My question is, if they are releasing these enzymes, so they are outside, they're also helping other fungi, right? There is no, I don't know, there is no competition, or I wonder that in the water, everything is there, right? Mm-hmm. And I wonder, where is the scale, where those enzymes can go also for them to receive the nutrients, right? Mm-hmm. Because in soil I understand, but in water that is fluid.
Yeah, it's moving, right?
Yeah.
So they release it, and if they don't catch it fast enough, it's gone in the flow.
So how
right?
much they have to release to get something?
That is an excellent question, and I don't have an answer to your question. But it is definitely known that these are leaky systems. They do not get back all of the products that they digest in their environment. And you're absolutely right. This helps other organisms in the stream environments. And it also can do things like soften, like partially digest that plant material. And then things like the caddisfly can eat then this partially digested plant material, and also the fungi. They can be food as well. But yeah, it is this leaky system. And how does it work? There has to be competition. And the speed must be incredible. I have no idea. But these are great questions that we'll have to keep working on to answer.
Yeah, I can imagine how much they need to produce all the time. And this needs energy, right? So they need the energy to produce more than they can have more. It's super interesting.
I agree. Is it okay if we take another question? Are we good on time? Okay.
I have a question. Do you find this fungi in all types of aquatic environments, like in streams, rivers, oceans? Are they everywhere, or?
I love this question. Yes. So there are different kinds of aquatic fungi in all of the aquatic environments, at least that I know of. And this includes streams, ponds, lakes, the ocean, where the water collects in a tree, between tree branches, right? Tree holes. As far as I am aware, yes, everywhere.
And is it possible to say in which environment there are most, like, biodiversity of them?
I look forward to answering that question. Right now, we don't have the ability to answer that because almost all of well, not almost all, that's not fair, but the majority of the work has only been done in freshwater. Right. And so I think we're really at this tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding these other aquatic environments. There's a great group doing marine fungi, for example. But we need more people who are interested in asking these questions, because everywhere people look, they find them.
Thank you.
More questions. We are actually a little bit ahead of schedule.
Oh, are we? Okay, because there's still more.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. So
I love questions, and we'll have more opportunity.
you can easily do one more question.
Okay. And now there won't be one.
I was wondering, I can say like this. You were saying about the multicellular fungi, but how many of them are unicellular? Because I think that there might be, maybe that's a different lifestyle, being like just living in the water rather than on the substrate.
So this is a great question. So remember I said that many of the fungi that we know the most about anyway grow with these filaments into and through their substrates, and that's where they do their digestion. But the question is things like yeast, for example. Yeast are unicellular fungi, and things like the fungi that control the algal blooms, those are chytrids. That's a different kind of unicellular, often unicellular fungus. Right? So they have quite different lifestyles than the decomposers that live on the leaves in the streams. And I think other people who work on those can give you a much more satisfying answer than I can. There's a diverse, I don't think we've yet scratched the surface of how many different ways fungi are living in aquatic environments and what their lifestyles look like.
Thank
I
you.
mean, there's even fungi that live on the insects that live in the water. There's fungi that live only on the left leg, on the back of one kind of insect that lives in the water. There's endless questions that we can ask. Okay, now I'm not going to go into tremendous detail on this part, because I hope we can continue this discussion in the future. But I would like to pose the question, why and how should we protect these fungi? So what I've done is I've introduced you to a group of organisms you've literally never imagined existed, except half of the audience, which is incredible, have heard about them before, okay? But really don't feel bad if you've never heard about them before today. And now I'm saying we should protect these organisms. Okay, let's think a little bit about that. So I first mentioned how they play a role in the ecosystems, right? They're part of the food webs and very important in their ability to facilitate the transfer of carbon and nutrients through the food webs. They can do things like, from our perspective, do things like control algal blooms and things like this. But we're actually also required to protect them. So are you familiar with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework? So this is a legal framework where we are expected to try to stop the extinction of known species, and by 2050, reduce tenfold the extinction rate of all species. We have the goal of restoring 30% of degraded ecosystems globally, on land and in sea, and on land includes in water. By 2030. We're expected to reduce the risk from pesticides by at least 50% by 2030. And we're expected to reduce pollution risks and negative impacts of pollution by 2030. Well, guess what? Fungi are species. So we are expected to reduce the risk of their extinction. That means we have to know what those risks are. We have to know what is affecting their populations. And right now, we don't know these things for aquatic fungi. We're expected to restore degraded ecosystems. Guess who can help with that? Aquatic fungi. So there are aquatic fungi that can live in incredibly polluted environments, including things like heavy metals. And they can be part of the solution to recovering these degraded environments. They are at risk of pesticides, reduce the risk of pesticides, okay? There are fungi that can break down, they're chemical magicians. Fungi are chemical magicians. There are fungi that can break down pesticides in water. And they can reduce the pollution risk by, again, being part of the degrading system that breaks down pollutions in the environment. So there are fungi that can degrade plastic, for example. I don't know off the top of my head right now if there's aquatic ones, but I believe there are. So they can be part of the solution, but we're also obligated to protect them. And then we also have an initiative called One Health. And in the One Health perspective, aquatic fungi are important when we think about antifungal resistance. So you've heard of antibiotic resistance, right? So this is when we often think of bacteria, right? So this is when a bacterium stops to respond to an antibiotic, okay? The same thing can happen with antifungals. And we have far fewer antifungals than we have antibiotics. And you're well aware of the risk of the antibiotic problem, I think, from other media. And they can serve as reservoirs for the genes that are involved in antifungal resistance in the environment. So I want to just give one brief example. So I reached out to my colleagues. I said, friends, I'm giving a talk, and I promised to talk about chemicals and chemistry, and that's not what I do. So there was a look of panic on that tweet. And my wonderful colleague, Teppo from Norway, he says this is his favorite example. And he said this is, and I'm terrible at pronouncing chemical names as well, lulworthinone. Anyone want to give that a try later? We can have a test, okay? So this is a new compound that hasn't been identified in any way before, that was found from a marine fungus. And it takes its name, as hard as it is for us to pronounce, from the Lulworthiaceae, which I can pronounce with no problem. It's when you change that ending, I struggle, okay? And this compound has antibacterial activity. And not just antibacterial activity, it has antibacterial activity against methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which you might have heard of as MRSA or MRSA, right? So this is a huge problem in our medical systems, in our care homes and community centers for the elderly, to our vulnerable populations, right? So this is just one example, but there's many examples and new things coming out every day where we're finding from aquatic fungi solutions to problems that we are facing in our society. So if you don't think the biodiversity argument is enough, you can think about the kind of societal good that it's in our interest to protect. Then I want to introduce you to the funga. I should have done a Mentimeter for this one. How many of you have heard the word funga before? I see only no's in the audience. Okay. I don't know what you're doing online.
If I may interrupt very quickly, we're having a little bit of network problems. So if we can take a 10-second break here, we will be back shortly.
Dance break. I like it.
I don't know if you've counted to 10, but I think we are back again. So please continue.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you made it through the technical difficulty. I don't know where you last heard me, but we last talked about whether or not you've heard the word funga before. And funga is a word that they have been fighting for quite a long time to bring into our awareness. And funga is the equivalent term for flora and fauna. So flora for the diversity of plants, fauna for the diversity of animals. We finally now have a term that's being adopted by organizations like the IUCN and the UN Panel on Biodiversity to represent the diversity of fungi. And words in this case matter because these organizations have agreed to include funga alongside flora and fauna in their policies, in their writing, in their communications. And so this is not just visibility. This can have legal ramifications to help secure and promote and support the growth of the protection and conservation of all fungi. Although today, mostly, we think about the mushrooms. So I'm happy to introduce you to the funga, and I hope that you will see it more and more. And this is something that the 3 groups that I'm participating with are working hard at promoting. So I am affiliated with 3 different groups, one called Fun Action, one called Most Fun, and one, when you have fungi in the name, it's, you know, and it's true. We're taking action for fungi, and we're having a lot of fun doing it. But excitingly also is that we now have, within the last year, I think we've been able to form an IUCN SSC Aquatic Fungi Specialist Group. What does that mean? It means that fungi are now, aquatic fungi, fungi have been represented at the IUCN for quite some time. Aquatic fungi now have an official representation at the IUCN, and these are the same people that make the red list. So if you're familiar with the extinction risk listing called the red list. And so this means that we have support from within the conservation community to develop programs to do things like assess how close are some of these fungi to extinction. What are the risks? How can we mediate them? It means we have a seat at that table alongside literally the people who study the polar bears and the sharks. So it's the polar bears, the sharks, and the aquatic fungi. But what are we doing in the other programs? We're developing the capacities to protect aquatic fungi and to monitor how they are doing in the environment, because we don't have those. We currently don't have developed tools to either understand how our protected areas are protecting aquatic fungi, because before this, people haven't been asking these questions, right? We care about the birds and we care about the fish, but if we want the birds and the fish to live in the environment, we have to have healthy functioning environments. And so we're really working, I would say from the ground up, but we're working from the water up to build those tools. And so that's what we're doing. I'm not going to go into great detail now about those, but just to say, this is how. It is how we're doing this. We are building the tools. We're connecting to the conservation organizations. We're working in every way that we can to see that these fungi are integrated into our conservation planning and our monitoring and assessment. All right, please take out your phones. This no, just for the record, so was done as a test before to make sure it was working. So we're gonna subtract 1 no from the final answer. So now I've made the question a bit trickier. So hopefully some of you say yes and you can say 1 thing about them. Hopefully some of you say yes and you can say 2 things about them. Something, and ideally, you might be able to tell your friends 3 things about the aquatic fungi after you've heard today's presentation. And this is fantastic, and we're gonna subtract the 1 no. And so I'm really pleased that you were able to learn something new about the aquatic fungi today. Questions? And this is the final questions. And after this, I'm just going to wrap up by acknowledging our funders and talking, if you would like me to, 1 slide about this water lily project, because you asked. And for those of you online, I am looking at the coordinator of the event for tonight.
Thank you. So for those of us who have never seen an aquatic fungi before, what's the survey methodology? How do we find them? Other than just looking for black dots in water? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So these are, when we talk about conservation and protection especially, but even for identification and understanding, most of our methods rely on us going out into that environment and looking at things and counting things and taking stock of what's in them, right? And I've showed you things that look like tiny black dots on wood that you have to take off your glasses and squint to see. So this is a fantastic question. And what we're doing is we're relying on methods that don't require you to go out and do that. So what we're trying to do is to build the capacity to take DNA from the environment and pull out sequences that we can trace back to fungi and use that information to identify the fungi that are in those environments. And so it's not realistic. We've known about aquatic fungi for, I don't know, since in the 1800s, right? And the progress the fantastic progress we've been able to make till today is through the morphological work and the going out and looking, is not going to be practical to be able to protect aquatic fungi at a scale beyond a pond, like that pond in the garden. And so we have to take these other approaches. But it is, there are hobbyists who go out and have a microscope and bring back samples and look at them. So it is possible to do that kind of work, absolutely.
Excellent, thank you.
I was wondering about the conservation. What you think is the biggest risk to these aquatic fungi? If there are any you know of that you think of when you think about conserving them or protecting them.
Okay, so just all the caveats. Right now, we don't have a lot of knowledge to base a firm answer to that question, okay? But what I can say is, if we focus, the fungi I study most are freshwater fungi. And freshwater environments are among the most threatened environments that we have, right? And the loss of biodiversity in our freshwater habitats is stunning. And we don't know what that has done to the fungi, right? But they're surely affected by some of the things that are affecting our terrestrial environments. We can think of things also directly, like we grow lots of agriculture crops. If we use fungicides to stop those nasty pathogens, right? Those fungicides, where do those end up? Those end up in our water. And they don't kill specific fungi, they kill fungi. So that's a direct threat. We're doing things like changing our inputs, changing the nutrient contributions, changing the nitrogen levels, changing all kinds of things. And so we're changing every possible factor, adding toxins, and we have I shouldn't say we have no idea, but we don't have enough information to really understand what effect that's having. And for some fungi, of course, that will be fine. Some fungi will turn out to be like dandelions, and they can grow everywhere, or we think of them that way anyway. Okay, but there are some fungi, for example, that have only ever been found once in one place in the world, in spite of repeated looking. And so changes to that environment put that kind of fungus in a really risky situation. So it's, we're really thinking about anthropomorphic threats that affect all of the biodiversity. So temperature, nutrients, changes to things like pH, addition of heavy metals. So I told you some fungi can live where it is really heavy metal polluted, okay? But those are maybe more like the dandelion type example I just gave you, right? What about the diversity that would have lived there without that? So I don't have a great answer to you, but this is why it's so important that we're taking the steps we're doing, and we're trying to find out what is affecting the biodiversity of these organisms at a scale across Europe. So this is work that we're doing in Fun Action, for example. So we are working as fast as we can to get those answers.
So I guess a lot of the work you're doing is sort of out in the field and looking at what exists in these streams and stuff. Are there any aquatic fungi that we know how to grow them in the lab? Like, do you have an aquarium in your lab with a bunch of fungi in them, or?
I don't have an aquarium, but that's a good idea. So there are many of the aquatic fungi that we have names for example, many of those lend themselves to being grown in a lab. So we can bring them in, we can put them on petri dishes, and we can grow them. At least to keep them alive, at least in their non-reproducing state. But of course, we don't know the ones that don't do that, right? So there are some number of them that we can do that. In a petri dish, there are probably some that we can keep in an aquarium, but again, this requires a lot of study, because if you do the study immediately when you bring those into the lab, you might get a different answer than after you put them in your aquarium for 2 weeks, because that's an incredibly different environment. So these are all the fun questions that one might want to ask.
My question is related to her question. For instance, do you know which is the impact of climate change or global warming on, I don't know, the reproduction, or how fast they can grow or not, or how infected they can be? Because I guess doing the experiments, for instance, in the lab can help you answer that question.
Wouldn't it be smart for us to know these answers? My knowledge is really best on this one particular group of fungi, and we have some studies that look at things like temperature and things like this, but we don't have enough information yet for me to give you a satisfying answer of any kind. But what I don't know is maybe they know different things about these ones that are, for example, parasites of the algal blooms. And I know that this particular audience member is familiar with that scenario. So it could be that, that there's more information on those. But just for context, the difference between a mushroom-forming fungus and this fungus is, 600 and something million years? The difference between the fungus that is the pathogen of these algal blooms and this fungus is much more than that. So these are, very, very different in their biology. So I don't have that answer, but someone probably does.
Thank you for a very nice talk. Are there any records of invasive aquatic fungi?
Are there any records of invasive aquatic fungi? I think before we can ask that question, we have to know what was there in the first place, right? So you guys are asking all the fantastic questions, and these are all of the questions that we're working to answer. And this is, for perspective, this is the first time that I know of that there has been such a big and coordinated effort to find answers to these questions. So these projects that I mentioned, for example, they have partners across Europe. One of them has partners in 7 countries, one of them in 9 countries, I think, off the top of my head. And this is really the first time that we've been able to organize and get the support to start asking these questions. Because surely this happens. It happens in every organism, right? And if you think about it, if there's a fungus associated with any insect, or a fungus associated with any crayfish, for example, I don't know, when those move, they bring their fungi with them. And so I think there's a huge potential for that. But the answer is, right now, we don't know. And isn't that something we should have an answer to? Did you guys get a chance, in case? I saw the microphone was kept over here. Just checking. Okay. To acknowledge the support for the work that we are doing to enable us to do the conservation and monitoring knowledge building and actions that we have clearly seen we need answers to these questions to be able to do. So I'm very grateful to our support from Biodiversa Plus, and it's part of an EU biodiversity partnership. And then because we have partners in all of the different countries, we have funders in all of the different countries. But in Sweden, it is Formas and Naturvårdsverket that are helping us to answer these questions. If you have had your curiosity, what's the right word there? If we have made some curiosity in you today, that's terrible formation. But we have a webinar coming up on Biodiversity Day on the 22nd, where we have 4 professionals, experts, who are going to talk to you about different aspects of aquatic fungi. And they all work with very different things. So one works with groundwater. One is a chemist, works with the chemistry discovery. One works with marine fungi. And one is working with aquaculture and parasites in aquaculture. So this is an opportunity for you to get some more in depth. Today we had a nice, fun, light conversation. This will also be fun and light, maybe a little heavier, but should be really excellent. And then I'm just going to look at Daniel, for those of you who are wondering what I'm looking at. Do you would like me to talk about this for a second? Okay. So when Daniel and I were talking about today's presentation, I don't remember how it started, but I have a new project about, there are better Swedish speakers in the room than I am. I will give it a try. Sjöguld. I'm getting nods and happy looks. Okay, so for those at home, I didn't do too bad. Okay, and so we have an invasive plant in many parts of Europe, but in Sweden as well. And this is called, in Swedish, sjöguld. In English, we call it fringed water lily, is one of its common names. And its scientific name is Nymphoides peltata. And this is a terrible invasive in our waters. So just in Lake Mälaren, there is something like 17 football fields worth of this plant. And that's your kind of football fields. Okay, so that you can picture the size. And that they grow in super dense mats. And what that does is it changes the light conditions, it changes the nutrient conditions, it changes what can live there. It might interfere with your ability to boat or swim, because these areas are often restricted. So it can have recreational implications as well. It outcompetes our native flora. And so it was an amazing event last year when, out of the blue, whole football fields worth of this plant died. And this is fantastic, because this is costing the Swedish governments, the local and regional governments, millions of kroner every year to try to fight this terrible invasive plant. It takes enormous human power to do the work and secure the funding and fight this battle. So the spontaneous death of them was just a fantastic thing. But guess what? We don't know what happened. And so this is one of the beautiful mysteries that I get to solve. And so I'm asking everyone who will be in Sweden this summer to scan this barcode. And when you see this plant in an area near you, please it just takes a minute or two to fill in this survey that you'll find. And let me know the condition of the plants that you're seeing. And I would love it if you're a dog walker or a boater, or you like to take your lunch by the pond, if you can do this again and again. That would be really helpful, because what we need to do is to understand the progression of events. And we have very good reason to suspect that this is a fungal infection. But it's a matter of doing the detective work. And this is detective work that is in all of our interests. So you can check us out on the Sjöguld webpage. You can find us at this barcode. There's, I think, even a wonderful video, which I am actually happy about. I just hate being on videos, on LinkedIn. So share it with your friends, please, and your families, and anyone who might be in a position to help.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. So we are Biotopia, for those who do not know. We are a biological museum in Uppsala. And on Wednesday evenings, we have an open house, you could say, or an open night until 8 o'clock, so another late night. But we have a lot of this type of presentations, and we would like even more. So in case you want to present, or you have a suggestion for something that you'd like to see here, you're welcome to get in touch. Biotopia.nu is our website. If you're watching this, you probably already found it somehow. But I'm saying it anyway. And thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.